This video is on how to name and write formulas for molecular compounds. So all of the videos you've watched and all the naming and writing formulas you've done so far have all been with ionic compounds. So remember, ionic compounds are going to have a metal and a nonmetal. So all of those had a metal, which was a cation, and a nonmetal, which was sometimes just an element or a polyatomic ion. So now we're talking about molecular compounds, and these are the ones that have covalent bonds. So this is when you have two nonmetals. And we can't name these the same as we did with our ionic compounds because we don't have a separate cation and anion. We're going to have basically two anions. So something like CO2 or N2O5, for example. So the way we name these is the charges aren't going to balance out, so we have to use those same Greek prefixes. So these are the same ones we used with our hydrates in that video. So go back to those if you need to when we start doing some of these practice. So let's write that down. Same prefixes for hydrates. Oops. Sorry about that. All right, so a couple rules with that, though. You're never going to have two O's next to each other. And you're like monooxide, you would just drop one of the O's, and you wouldn't put an A and an O next to each other. So you wouldn't have pentaoxide, you would just be pentoxide. So you'll see that as we go through. Those aren't things you would necessarily get marked wrong on if you did them, just that these are the rules, though. So these are typically how they will be written correctly. So the first element name, the ending stays the same. So, and by first element, we're not worried about like cation goes first or anything like that. Whatever the first one written, all right, you're just going to keep that element name exactly the same. So if you have like CO2, okay, our first element is carbon, so I just write carbon. I don't do anything with the ending. Now, prefixes, if I had more than one, I would say dicarbon or something like that. But we don't use, and I got to put this in here, mono with the first element. So if there is only one, like in this CO2, we just write carbon. We don't write monocarbon. All right, so then the second element name changes to IDE because it's always going to be just an element. So that really is kind of the same as in our ionic compounds. So this would be carbon, and we use the prefix di for 2, oxide. Okay, so let's do some examples. All right, so let's say I had Cl2O7. So I have chlorine as my first element. I don't change the ending. I just put the prefix. So dichlorine. And then the second element I have is oxygen. And for that one, we are going to write the prefix, but we're going to change the ending to "ide." So hepta is the prefix for 7. So hept oxide, we drop the A when it's next to an O. So heptoxide. So dichlorine heptoxide. So another one, if I have NO. All right, so I have nitrogen and no prefix for mono if it's the first element, so just nitrogen. But I have one oxygen for my second element, so monoxide. We drop one of the O's. I wouldn't write monooxide. Okay, so let's go the reverse way. Let's say my name is Sulfur Hexafluoride. Okay, so the first element, sulfur, it doesn't have a prefix, so that means it's just 1. And my second element, fluoride, would be fluorine. And hexa means I have 6. All right, another one of those, if I have dinitrogen, oops, trioxide. All right, dinitrogen, so nitrogen, di means 2. Oxide means oxygen, and tri means 3. So N2O3. The tricky part gets to be when you have mixed up covalent and ionic molecules and figuring out which way to name them. So after we feel good with this in class, we will do practice where they are all mixed up.